There are finally signs of a ceasefire in Syria, if you can believe it, more than a year after the government there first started slaughtering its own men, women, and children. But the head of the United Nations is warning a single gunshot could shatter what he calls a fragile peace. And some world leaders are questioning the Syrian regime's real motives here. The UN Secretary General said he was encouraged by the apparent lack of violence today, but other world leaders say the regime of the Syrian President Bashar al-Assad is not fully cooperating with the peace deal because there are still troops and there are still heavy weaponry in most major towns. Of course, the United Nations estimates Syrian troops have killed more than 9,000 of its own citizens since the uprising began last March. Joining me now is the former United States ambassador to Israel and Syria. Joining us now, currently the director of the Baker Institute for Public Policy at Rice University, Edward Djerejian, is with us. Sir, it's nice to see you.
Pleasure to be with you, Chef.
Ceasefire, you believe it? What are the real motives here?
This ceasefire is extremely fragile. It's tenuous, and both sides are very suspicious of the intentions of the other. The Syrian regime is extremely concerned that a ceasefire could lead to more protests in the major cities, especially Aleppo and Damascus, that could take on a momentum of their own, as we saw in Tunisia and Egypt. And so they're going to be monitoring the public protests very, very carefully. And I think we're going to see armored units and military units not too far away from population centers. On the other hand, the Syrian opposition does not trust the intentions of Bashar al-Assad's regime. So therefore, it's a very fragile situation.
Well, what is the rest of the world supposed to do now?
Well, I think the best thing one can do in this very difficult and complex situation is to, at all costs, the international community should do everything possible to avoid a civil war and sectarian warfare in Syria, which means that Muslims, Sunnis, Shia, Druze, Christians, Kurds, that there does not become a civil war as we saw in Lebanon in the 1970s and 80s, as we saw in Iraq after our invasion of Iraq. These countries like Syria, Lebanon, Iraq are multi-confessional, Christians, Muslims, other groups, and the worst case scenario is that Syria devolves into sectarian warfare. That would destabilize the whole region, the Levant, with very important neighbors, Israel, Jordan, Iraq, Lebanon, Turkey. So that should be the major goal, to avoid civil war, to avoid sectarian conflict. Now, the problem is that in the Annan plan and every other proposal that's been initiated has had an element of political transition, to get the regime to agree to a political transition that would be more broadly representative of the will of all the Syrian people. But we don't see the Bashar al-Assad regime willing to do that.
Yeah, time will tell. We can hope. Dr. Edward Djerejian, who is live with us from Rice University. Mr. Ambassador, thank you so much.
My pleasure.